Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, I must say that this topic was supposed to be a panel discussion, but last evening I was told by the organizers that a couple of the panelists and the moderator have dropped out. So I had to quickly convert my thoughts into a PPT. Uh, but as you know, in the army, we can rise to any occasion. So I have put together some things which I hope will be of benefit to you. Uh, since there was no introduction, I must introduce myself as a disclaimer. I am an oncosurgeon, but who retired as the Director General Medical Services of the whole Army. So, though being a super specialist in cancer, but in the Army, the moment you become brigadier, you do take up command and administrative appointments. So, the last 10 years, I've been dealing with a lot of public health issues, including vaccinations for our own Jawans. So, I'm sure that a lot of people here have become very knowledgeable about vaccines over the last 1 year. But just to go back and introduce the topic, basically, vaccine can be a microorganism or a virus in a weakened, live, killed state, or may contain proteins or toxins from the organism, which stimulates the body's adaptive immunity, helping prevent sickness and infectious disease. And we've all been hearing about herd immunity. That is when a sufficiently large population has been vaccinated, or in our case, actually, it's been found in sero surveys that more than 50 to 60% of most of the people surveyed in our big cities like Delhi and Mumbai and all have already developed antibodies to the COVID virus. Match between my laptop over here and the screen. So we'll have to live with that. So basically the word immunology came in from the Latin word immunis, which means exempt, and in English it means protection from disease. And the body always works towards ridding the body of foreign particles, which can be microbial or otherwise, or any abnormal cells like a cancer cell. And our immune system involves the interplay between our non-specific and our specific immune responses. So you can have a non-specific response, or you can have a COVID storm, which has been responsible for most of the deaths in the COVID virus pandemic. So our immune systems generate almost an infinite variety of cells and substances. So whenever the body detects there's a foreign item in the body, which may be a virus, maybe a bacteria, maybe a tumor cell or abnormal mutated cell, there's an effector response. In the case of bacteria and viruses, this basically consists of antibodies to eliminate or neutralize the particle. And there can also be memory cells, which are the T cells or the lymphocytes, which preserve the memory that the body was infected with this particular substance. And the second time when you're infected again, there is an enhanced immune response, so the body can immediately react to it. That is what a vaccine does, or that is what an exposure to the disease itself does. Since the topic itself wanted me to speak about the history of vaccine development, so just to touch upon a few interesting facts that the smallpox vaccine, the smallpox virus was supposed to have originated from India or Egypt. And in 300 BC, we have got descriptions of smallpox in our Sanskrit literature. And it was Abu Bakr who differentiated it from measles. And 1,000 years back, inoculation was documented from China and India. So we were far ahead of the West. When people in the West were running around in animal skins, here we were doing inoculation. And even as late as 1600 AD, we have got documented evidence of the practice of inoculation, that is called variolation, from India. However, as the West have always been known to take away our ideas and publicize it, so Dr. Howell described this practice of inoculation in India to the College of Physicians in London in 1767. And Dr. Jetsey did an experiment with this on his wife and 2 children by injecting them with cowpox matter. However, it was Edward Jenner in 1796 who conducted his famous observations on milkmaids and published about vaccination. And it was quickly brought to British India. Again, that's an interesting story that it was carried from pustule to pustule in the ships, and with stops in Constantinople, that is Istanbul, and in Baghdad. And the first smallpox vaccination was done in India in British times in 1802. Edward Jenner was a physician who, as a young man, had heard about young farm girls, that is the milkmaids, that they used to get this cowpox from milking the infected cows, and they used to get blisters on the hands. And thereafter, they were immune from smallpox. So they used to, in fact, be very vain about it, that just because I've got cowpox, so I'm never going to get smallpox, I'm never going to get those ugly scars on my face and body. So he used this on 14 May 1796 in a famous experiment on a healthy 8-year-old boy, James Phipps, who he infected with cowpox, taking the pustule from the arm of a milkmaid, Sarah Names. So they have become, icons in the medical literature. However, it shows that before that he had already experimented on his own son, then aged 1.5 years old, with the swine pox, followed by the conventional smallpox inoculation. And this famous photograph shows Edward Jenner infecting that little boy. However, it took 200 years for the WHO to announce that smallpox was finally eradicated from the world. Louis Pasteur is another name I'm sure most of us have heard about in pasteurization of milk. And he was the one who discovered that old bacterial cultures of Pasteurella lost their virulence. And he referred to the injection of this weakened culture as a vaccine in honor of Jenner. And this photograph shows you how he was inoculating people. And he worked on developing this method for treating or creating the rabies vaccine at his Pasteur Institute. The other famous names in vaccine development are Metchnikoff, who discovered that phagocytic cells in the body ingest microbes and particles. And it was Von Behring and Kitazo who discovered that blood sera could transfer immunity. And the liquid part of the blood, that is what we call the sera, conferred the immunity. And hence questions arose as to which was the part which conferred the immunity, the cells or the serum. And it was later realized that both serum and cells contribute to immunity. The serum carries the antibodies and the cells are the T lymphocytes. It was Paul Ehrlich who worked with the famous Robert Koch, who's very famous in the field of pulmonary coughs or TB, who developed the antitoxin for diphtheria. And he also propagated the side chain theory of antibody formation, which stands good even today. That when there's a antigen which comes to the body, it hits the receptors of the cell, and that is how it locks in with that, and that's how antibody is produced. And this was a famous diagram which is very similar to what is actually known today. And for this he shared the Nobel Prize in 1908 with Metchnikoff. Another famous name was Karl Landsteiner, who revealed that antibodies could be produced against almost any organic compound. And in the last 20 years, antibody specificity has revealed unlimited range of reactivity also to newly synthesized chemicals, which we'll be talking about in more detail later. So the 30s was marked by the early techniques which made it easier to study the humoral elements, that is the cellular elements, and the discovery of the active component of blood, that is gamma globulin. It's a protein. And the 50s led to the discovery of T and B cells, which discoveries linked both lymphocytes to both cellular and humoral immunity. That is the B lymphocytes and the T lymphocytes, which I'm sure most of you have read about in the literature nowadays. In the papers, everybody's become an expert nowadays. In India, when the vaccines first came in, there was a lot of hesitancy, as is prevalent even today, I'm sorry to say. There's a lot of vaccine hesitancy just because India is producing it in plenty. And as they say, ghar ka murgi dal barabar. So it was the Diwan of Travancore who actually popularized it by getting himself and his family inoculated first. And thereafter vaccination continued to increase. Basically the Britishers brought it in here to inject their own troops stationed in the Madras and Bombay presidency. And later in the 1820s it spread to the Bengal presidency also. And all the Britishers inoculated themselves initially first. The first animal vaccine production was in USA in 1870, and first laboratory vaccine was produced by Pasteur for chicken cholera. I'm sure you didn't know that even chickens could get cholera. In 1890, the first animals vaccine depot was set up in Shillong. So we were ahead of the world even that time. And the first cholera vaccine trial was conducted in Agra in 1893. The Compulsory Vaccination Act was passed by the Government of India in 1892 and the Epidemic Act in 1896. And this Epidemic Act was invoked by the government now when dealing with the present pandemic, if you all remember. The first plague vaccine was developed by Dr. Haffkine in Bombay, and the plague laboratory which he set up was renamed as the Haffkine Institute, which I'm sure most of you have heard about. But however, there were few deaths reported after the plague vaccination in Punjab, which was a setback to the plague vaccination. But later the deaths were found to be problematic error. The first typhoid vaccine trial was done by British Army officials posted in India, and the first air-dried smallpox vaccine was made in Paris in 1909. A number of vaccine institutes were set up in different provinces of this country, and the BCG lab in Guindy, Madras was set up in 1948, and BCG mass campaigns were started in India. And as you know, that some people have postulated that the reason why Indians did not get such severe effects of the pandemic was perhaps due to the immunity that has been conferred upon us by getting BCG vaccination in childhood. The last case of smallpox was reported in India in 1975 and in the world in 1977. Coming to the history of vaccines, the earliest vaccines were relatively crude. They were partially purified live attenuated virus, that is, it was used for smallpox and rabies that is mentioned, and an inactivated bacteria was used for pertussis, that is whooping cough. However, as technology advanced, refined methods were introduced, which are used even today, like the production of toxides from a protein, which is used for the tetanus toxide, which I'm sure most of us have been taking whenever we have been getting a cut. Then the purified and inactivated virus was used to make the hepatitis A virus, and is also being used for the biovaccine, by the way, the Covaxin. The virus-like particles have been used for hepatitis B and HPV, that is the human papilloma virus, which actually has been known to cause cancer cervix, and this has now become almost a must for inoculation of all girls in their teens. The purified polysaccharides have been used for a pneumococcal vaccine. And we classify these vaccines according to whether they are whole organisms, purified macromolecules, combined antigens, recombinant vectors, synthetic peptides, or DNA, RNA-based vaccines. The production technologies have also advanced, and modern vaccine development exploits a wide array of novel technologies for creating safer and more efficacious vaccines, such as the viral vectors produced in animal cells, virus-like particles produced in yeast or insect cells, polysaccharide conjugation carrier proteins, DNA plasmids, or mRNA-based vaccines. The promising approaches for the future seem to be gene-based vaccines, virus-like particles, plant-derived vaccines, novel adjuvants and delivery systems, and the consequences will be faster access to more effective vaccines against a broader spectrum of infectious diseases. However, the increased cost of producing vaccines remains a challenge for the manufacturers. The first vaccines to be used were the whole life viruses and by human to human transfer or animal to human transfer. The production methods, however, advanced to live attenuated virus vaccines produced either in vitro or in vivo. In vivo means inside the body. As I mentioned, the bacterial virus vaccines created by Louis Pasteur used weakened bacterial cultures for cholera and anthrax. And the BCG vaccine for TB was developed around the same time. And the pertussis virus was licensed in 1918 and later combined with toxides to make the DPT, which was part of the compulsory immunization program for all children from birth onwards. Modern cell culture-based vaccines firstly they used in vitro cultivated viral vaccine like the polio virus in non-neural human cells by Enders in 1949. And the famous Salks inactivated polio vaccine was first cultured in primary monkey kidney cells in 1955. And these vaccines are still used till date. Whole virus vaccine has been used for the attenuated rabies vaccine, and they require specialized facilities for virus propagation. Safety risks associated with whole cell and whole virus vaccine made scientists look for vaccines based on individual pathogen antigens, that is subunit vaccines, which I'll be describing in more detail later. These subunit vaccines are safer, less immunogenic due to the absence of viral or cellular components. And you can have polysaccharide vaccines, which are taken from the surface of a bacterial capsid. It's a subunit vaccine for typhoid, for example. Or pneumococcal and meningococcal vaccines, which use again parts of the, like you can have a 14-valent vaccine or a 23-valent vaccine. The newer approaches use reverse vaccinology. That is, you do a genome analysis. If you recollect, at the beginning of the pandemic only, the Chinese, since they already knew about the virus and had produced it 3 months back before the rest of the world, they did a genome analysis of the whole COVID-19 virus, and that analysis helped the companies to produce vaccine against the COVID virus or the Wuhan virus as it's called very quickly. So genome analysis is used to identify the complete repertoire of antigens that are surface exposed and highly antigenically conserved across multiple strains. As you know, that the virus is mutating very rapidly. And so the vaccine development also has to keep pace with that, because there are different mutations coming up. In UK alone, there are about 7 different mutations which have occurred, and same in USA. The more immunogenic epitopes once sequenced are typically patented and evaluated for suitability in various vaccine formulations. For example, the influenza vaccine is based on a recombinant hemagglutinin protein antigen rather than on live attenuated virus. And it's because the influenza virus again keeps mutating, hence one has to take booster shots of different types of influenza vaccine almost every year. This is being done in the West very commonly. The new approaches use a systems biology approach, which integrates multiple fields of study to explore the interactions between different biological systems. Mathematical modeling evaluates data collected from various fields, that is transcriptions, metabolomics, proteomics, to elucidate the causes and effects in biological networks. This leads to a greater understanding of vaccine antigen interaction with different components of the immune system. As you know, the spike proteins of the COVID virus has been used to create the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines. So other examples are virus-like particles which have been developed against the human papilloma virus, the HPV virus, which is associated with cervical cancer. The 2 prominent brand names are Gardasil and Cervarix. However, we have Indian vaccines now being produced in Hyderabad. Viral-based vaccines and viral vectors are regarded as potential tools for gene therapy and vaccines. This is very important, especially in the field of cancer. The advantage of viral vectors, these are basically carriers, like what has been used in our Serum Institute or Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. You have a carrier vaccine. The advantage of viral vectors are high efficiency of gene transduction, highly specific delivery of genes to target cells, induction of robust immune responses, and increased cellular immunity. And recombinant viral vectors have the potential for therapeutic use, as they enable intracellular antigen expression and induce a robust cytotoxic T lymphocyte response, leading to the elimination of virus-infected cells. The same principle is used for cancer, for gene therapy in cancer also, which is going to be the treatment for future cancers. Coming to the other vaccine production technologies, the virus vectors can be the vaccinia virus, the adenovirus vectors, the adeno-associated virus, retroviruses, lentiviruses, and cytomegalic virus vectors. I won't go into the details of this. Other vaccine technologies are the conjugate vaccines, which combine a pathogen antigen with a carrier protein that lends additional immunogenicity to the vaccine. For example, in the typhoid vaccine, it is based on the Y polysaccharide of the Salmonella typhi bacteria, which is improved by conjugating it to several carrier proteins. And these are non-recombinant and require fermentation of the original pathogens in a higher biosafety level facility. They represent an advance in vaccine technology. And this shows how actually the conjugate vaccine is made from polysaccharides and the carrier protein fermentation. Coming to DNA vaccines, this again is the technique which is being used by Zydus Cadila for making their vaccine, which is under trials right now. The DNA vaccines can lead to a strong and long-lasting immune response by inoculation of a plasmid containing a gene. Plasmid is something which is found inside the virus, containing a gene for a particular protein antigen, which expresses by the cellular machinery of the person receiving the vaccine. And these DNA vaccines offer the potential for immunotherapy of diseases, that is like tumors, and they can induce a cytotoxic T effector lymphocyte response for antigen-specific apoptosis of infected cells. Apoptosis means cell death. Virus-like particles are basically viral structural proteins that are expressed in cells and possess native conformal epitopes. There can be subunit vaccines. They do not contain a genome. They are incapable of spreading infection, and they have a repetitive antigenic structure that can stimulate both cellular and humoral responses. Examples are hepatitis B core particles. Hepatitis B inoculation is very important for all healthcare workers. HPV virus vaccine has also been made from this. And this shows how a recombinant hepatitis B vaccine is made. Basically, it's a hacking into a virus. You take a particle from the hepatitis antigen, match it with a plasmid gene by cutting part of the plasmid gene, combining it to make a recombinant factor, which is again inoculated into yeast cells, ferment it, and you get the HB antigen, which is the HB vaccine. Coming to the mRNA virus, these vaccines are using lipid encapsulated or naked forms of sequence optimized mRNA targets in animal models, such as the influenza virus, the Zika virus, the rabies virus, and they have several benefits over the subunit or killed or live attenuated viruses or DNA-based vaccines. The safety is because there are a lot of issues about whether the mRNA vaccine is safe. In fact, my daughter who's in USA, who's a dentist, still refuses to take it, thinking that it might change her DNA in the future. However, it is non-infectious, non-integrating platform, no potential risk of infection or insertional mutagenesis as per present knowledge, because this is a new field which has been used by Pfizer and Moderna for making the COVID vaccines which are being used in the West. The mRNA is degraded by normal cellular process, and it is highly efficacious. The mRNA vaccines induce a strong CD8 plus T cell response and CD4 responses. Actually, in HIV, those who know, these are the cells which actually confirm immunity to the body, and these are affected by the HIV virus, and hence the patient is susceptible to all sorts of infections as well as secondary tumors, the HIV infected patient. So the major types of RNA vaccine has been either self-amplifying mRNA vaccines, which enable a large amount of antigen to be produced by the body from an extremely small dose of the vaccine, or non-replicating mRNA vaccines, which need, they're simple and economical and administrative, but they require a larger dose of the vaccine. So this shows actually how the mRNA vaccine is produced by taking it from the virus, the mRNA. This is a very busy slide which shows you the technology basically of all the major types of vaccines that I've been speaking about, and which are in common production right now. And I won't go into the details of this because it's quite a busy thing. As you know, development of a vaccine takes a long time because there's a preclinical stage and then there's a clinical development, where first in phase 1 is the vaccine is tested for its safety, in phase 2 is tested for its efficacy, in which the dosage schedule is also fixed up, and then in the third phase the vaccine is again tested for safety as well as efficacy. So people have been saying that the Covaxin, which is the indigenously developed vaccine, is not is being hesitated for it to be taken because they say the phase 3 data is not yet out. Because phase 3 actually takes about 40,000 patients to get some sort of development. But the phase 3 data has shown that it's a very safe vaccine. So I think, and everybody who's been taking it, because even in Bombay City, 2 types of vaccines are being given by the government and there's been no major side effects in our country. Just to recollect, the right side of the slide shows you the good and bad points about the different technologies of virus which I've been talking about: the live attenuated vaccine, the killed or inactivated vaccine, the recombinant protein vaccine, the DNA vaccine, and the mRNA vaccine. So finally, we have a light at the end of the tunnel. Because there are so many vaccines available right now and more are in the different stages of development. In fact, the Sputnik Russian vaccine is also going to be in production in our country very soon. Then the Zydus Cadila is also in the pipeline. So we'll have 4 vaccines of proven technology in the near future with which the whole population can be inoculated. However, it's a mega exercise to achieve this herd immunity because first of all there are problems about the syringe and vials, as you may have read or heard about in the news. Japan has got plenty of vaccines but they don't have the specialized syringes to extract the 6th dose in the vial of the Moderna or the Pfizer vaccine. Hence Japan has been wasting a lot of vaccine doses because they can't extract that last dose in the vial. So we have also beefed up our syringe capability, though we are not giving those vials. But then there's transport problems. It's a logistic nightmare for the vaccine to reach every corner of the country. There are storage problems. Actually, we have cold chain problems. These vaccines are supposed to be stored at 2 to 8 degrees centigrade. But not everybody has got a fridge or the electricity, in fact, to keep those vaccines in safe storage. If you keep it beyond that temperature, the vaccine will lose its potency. Then the awareness, as I said that today, in fact, even amongst the healthcare workers has been reported, at least in Maharashtra, that 50% of the healthcare workers have not been taking the vaccine out of some sort of fear. Then you have to have manpower trained. So the government has been making efforts for this training of vaccinators, and now they're giving permission also to the private hospitals in Mumbai to, like in other places in the country, that we can also inoculate our own workers so we can achieve some 100% of inoculation. Then we have to decide the priorities. As you know, we have already decided for priority 1 is healthcare workers. 10% of the vaccines will go to that. Then next will be the frontline workers, inoculation of whom has already started. And third priority will be those above 50 years or those less than 50 years with comorbidity. Then again, in the world, the major nations like USA, UK, Canada, etc., the richer nations have already cornered or pre-booked the majority of vaccines so that the poorer countries cannot get it. So India has come to the rescue of the world by supplying vaccine at cheap rate to more than 20 countries already. This is under the Gavi program, the Global Vaccine Alliance. And I must say that we are not out of the woods as yet. Though we have supposed to have achieved herd immunity, but somehow people have lost the fear of the vaccine. You see everybody partying like there's no tomorrow. And even in our old hospital, the workers who earlier were absolutely scared and did not come to work also for a couple of months are now going around behaving as if there's no COVID in sight. And that, along with the unlocking of the economy, has again started resulting in increase in the numbers. And the Maharashtra government has been threatening that they'll be putting lockdown again in about 7 districts if things don't improve. So I always say, for us, the vaccine is the mask. When you're wearing a mask, you are reducing the vaccine load that you are ingesting whenever you're breathing, talking. So don't forget to use your mask at all times. So even I have mine in my pocket. And For us in the healthcare industry, it is, we cannot forget that handling, treating, and safely disposing of our biomedical waste is of utmost importance. I, like all the other private hospitals in Bombay, had to spring to the occasion and establish COVID wards and COVID ICUs the moment the pandemic started. And we are still getting patients. We had a drop in patients between October to January, but again, the numbers have started rising, as I just said. So stay safe, all of you, and don't forget to wear your masks and maintain your social distance. Thank you very much.